This section will focus on time-based charts. The terms plot or graph are often used interchangeably with the term chart, but for consistency, I will try to use the term chart. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at time-based charts, which means we can look at things like distance traveled over time, monthly sales, or maybe the way interest rates or stock prices have fluctuated over time, over years. We could also do month-to-month comparisons, say over the year for electricity usage or any other usage. These are just some examples. We're going to use the OpenOffice Calc application to do the plotting. Now the reason we spent so much time looking at data manipulation skills is so that we could put our data in a format that would easily be charted. In this case, we created a data set that has time in the first column and distance in the second. And now that we have it in this format, we can easily chart it using any kind of spreadsheet application. As I mentioned, we're going to use OpenOffice Calc here. So let me just run through the reference guide first, and then we'll take a look at the actual application. So to begin, you start with the menu and you go to Insert Chart. You choose the type of chart you want. In this case, we're going to choose a line chart with points and lines. After that, we'll go down and choose our data ranges. So we need to specify the x-axis and the y-axis. And sometimes the y-axis is called the series, the data series. Finally, we'll end up just cleaning up the chart a little bit with some titles and labels, things like that. Probably won't spend too much time with that, but you can see you'll be able to see the different options that you have. So let's go ahead and get started on the application. We'll open up our data set here, and the first thing you want to do is highlight the data that you want to chart, because that way the application will already know the data you want to work with, and that just saves a step later, and I'll show you where that happens. So once you have your data selected, go up to Insert, go down to Chart, and a little wizard will open up and it will guide you through all the steps you need. And as you notice, it's already created a chart for us, but this isn't what we're looking for. We wanted to do a line chart. And not just points, but points and lines. And then we can click Next once we choose the type of chart we want. Now, one thing to notice is it's not really plotting what we expect, but that's okay. We'll handle that in the next section. So this is where I said when we pre-selected or pre-highlighted the data we wanted to chart, it knew that and it lists it here. So we're going from A1 to B12, which is up here down to here. Now if you hadn't pre-selected your data, you could do that now by clicking this icon. Now one thing to notice is that as I mentioned, the chart doesn't look like the way we would expect. We're just expecting time to be on the bottom axis and then the distance to be in the y-axis, but what it's doing is it's taking both of those and plotting them in the y-axis. So what we have to do is we have to tell it that the first column, we have to select this down here, first column is label, and we do that, you'll see that the plot changes. Okay, now what we're doing is we're plotting distance. So on the bottom part, let me see if I can move this out of the way. Okay, it's not showing the label, the x-axis label, but now we're plotting time. You can see that the values down here have changed, and now time is on the x-axis and we're plotting distance over time. So you may have to make sure that these checkboxes are checked appropriately to represent the data the way you want it to be. And we're going to, in this case, we're going to say that the data series are in columns. And like I mentioned, this will be your first data series. Okay, when you do that, click Next, and then it already knows that our y-axis is this second column, and we already saw that because of the way it was plotted. But if you had to change that, this is the place that you would specify what you wanted in the y-axis. And you can click Next, And in this case, we could add a title, x-axis and y-axis titles. Let's go ahead and just put this down here just so it makes it a little more clear. Okay, you could also specify the units, which is probably not a bad idea. And then you can click Finish. And here we have a simple plot. Okay, one of the other things that we could do is like a comparison, and this is just going to be, I'm not going to go through all the steps, but let's say we had 2 years that we wanted to compare each month, and this could be maybe electricity usage or our electricity bill, or it could be anything. It's just comparing year 1 to year 2 for each month. So if we selected the whole data set and we went up to Insert Chart, we'll see now that the application has actually selected the data the way we want it. And so without really doing much, we can see a side-by-side comparison to compare how much electricity, say, we used. If this was representing electricity used, then we would be able to see that in year 1 we used more than in year 2, but in January, but maybe over here in April we used more in year 2 than we used in year 1. So that will do it for this section. We'll run through a few more charts, but the main thing is that you're aware of the main steps. Number 1, choosing the type of chart you want. Number 2, defining the x-axis. Number 3, defining the y-axis. And number 4, just cleaning it up with some labels and titles. Now I'll make a chart based on a category. Categories could also be viewed or looked at as a group. So things like a population or population demographics, number of items sold or the types of items sold, any kind of survey result, usually will have some kind of category or group associated with it, and we can use that to then make a chart and make it a lot more clear to an audience what those numbers reflect. So there's several types of charts that could be used. In this example, we're going to use a pie chart and then a column chart. And the data that we're going to use is the number of cookies sold and by type. So let me just run through really quick what we're shooting for. We're going to make a pie chart first, and it's going to look something like that. And then this is just in the reference guide. I'm going to scroll down to the next chart. And then we're going to look at a column chart. And we'll look at all 3 of these. We're going to look at a side-by-side comparison, a stacked comparison based on the count, and then a stacked comparison based on percentage. So let's go ahead and jump over to the application and create these charts. So in this case, we're going to look at the cookie types and the numbers sold. We'll pretend that this is the total number sold. So if we wanted to show a distribution of that, a pie chart, it would be a very good representation. So like I said, always select the data first. Just makes your life a little bit easier later on. Go to Insert, Chart, and the application by default selected the column chart. In this case, we want pie chart, so select pie. And based on the data set, the application pretty much chose exactly what the representation that we want. So I think we could probably just click Finish here. Let me move this out of the way. And we can see that just a quick visualization shows that the chocolate chip cookies had 12,000 sold, so we'd expect that to be the bigger part of the pie. And sure enough, the blue part is showing the chocolate chips, and it looks like it's the bigger part of the pie. And then you can see how the other ones are sold relative to the chocolate chip. So I think this is pretty much in the form we want it. We could click through the wizard next, change anything. Maybe you can see the way the chart changes if it's something, if you want to see something different. But in this case, I'll just click next all the way to the end. We won't put any titles or subtitles at this point. Just click Finish, and this is a good representation. So you could use this in a presentation or in a report, and it's a very quick and easy way to have a nice visualization to demonstrate how a category is charted. The next example we'll look at is a comparison between two employees. Let's say we wanted to understand how one employee was performing against another. So once again, select all the data, go up to Insert, Chart, and in this case we do want a column chart. Let me move this wizard over a little bit. In this case, this is a pretty good representation of the number of cookies that employee 1 sold compared to employee 2. We can see in most cases employee 1 sold more than employee 2. We also might want to use a stacked bar chart if we wanted to know the total count, because right now it looks like we'd have to add these together, with the 12,000 and the 9,500. But if we use a stacked chart, not only would we see how one compared against the other, but we would see the total count of cookies sold. So that might be of interest to somebody. Finally, we can look at the percentage chart, and this will show how one employee compared to the other. And this, just by looking at the color scheme here, you can tell pretty close or pretty quickly how employee 1 compared to employee 2. And in most cases, it looks like employee 1 outperformed employee 2, except for in this last category here. Now just always be aware that either when you're providing information or when you're getting information, that a number count alone or a percentage alone could be a little bit misleading. So whether that's intentional or unintentional, that the chart you want to provide is a true representation of the data. So that will do it for the category chart. The last chart we're going to talk about is a location-based chart. Now on a location-based chart, we have a map and we plot our data on top of that map. And this is very useful and powerful in showing maybe geographically where things are happening. Now a lot of spreadsheet applications don't have this functionality built in, and you may have to find an external application that could do this. Right now I'm just going to demonstrate the concept using Google Fusion Tables, but as you'll see, even Fusion Tables is going away. They'll probably replace it with something later. But again, you may have to find some other application that can do geographical plotting or charting for you. This is just really to demonstrate for your awareness purposes. So using Google Fusion Tables, you first need to have an internet connection, a Google account, and then you'll go to your Google Drive, and then you go to more apps, and then you'll have to add or search for Fusion Tables and then add that in. Once you do that, and once you have a data set such as this simple data set, state and population, with some states and their populations listed here, I'm just going to use 3 for the purposes of this chart. Once you have that, then you can go to your Google Fusion Table, you open up that application, you choose your file, and again, it's just a small data file. Click Next. It's already comma separated. It shows here our headings, the state and population, and the data below, so we're good there. Just click Next and then Finish. It takes a little bit to process, but when it gets done, you'll be able to see a map. Okay, this is just showing our data, but here on this tab you can click on Map. If I zoom in, you can see now that our data points are in California, Illinois, and New York. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all the different options that you can use for charting on a map, but this is really just for an awareness purposes, so that you know that you could chart on a map, and if it suits your situation, you just may have to go find that right application or plugin for an existing application to be able to have this functionality. A pivot table is a very useful tool for analyzing numbers and for presenting decision-making information to management. A pivot table is derived from a normal data set such as this, where you have some fields and some data. A pivot table is going to need at least one numeric field, and so in this case the numeric field that we would revolve the pivot table around would be, say, the sales price. Okay, so there's a couple things to be aware of. Let's take a look at what a pivot table might look like. So here we see the result of a pivot table, and you can see all the numbers are on the inner cells. The outside cells, at least on the left and the top, represent filter fields. So we can filter by any of these, say, regions, or maybe filter by the vehicle type. On the bottom row and the far right row are totals, and these are all optional, or at least the totals are optional. You can either display them or not. So in summary, you have four basic components. You have a row filter, you have a column filter, you also have a general filter that can be up here, and we'll see that in a second, and you have the numbers that you can act upon. And then I guess if you wanted to add a fifth component, you'd have the totals. Okay, so let's take a look at how to create a pivot table now. Now here's just a normal data set. It's pretty basic. We have a region, a dealer, vehicle type, and sales. And so let's say we wanted to understand how our sales were being categorized or how they were grouped together. I've already created the pivot table, so we're going to go down here and take a look at it. So once again, we have our one filter that goes across here, across the top, another filter that goes down here on the left side, and then we have a general filter up here. And we'll see how to create this in just a second. And then of course our totals at the bottom and our data in the middle. So all this data that was up here is represented in this pivot table. So if we wanted to say only, let's say we wanted to exclude one of the regions. So right now we're showing east, north, south, and west. Let's say we wanted to exclude the west. If we did that and clicked OK, now we get rid of our west field or category, and the total results now change. These numbers now change to reflect only what we filtered here. Now what if we wanted to only know about, say, trucks? We can do that again, and now we see how many trucks have sold in these regions. And let's say we want to expand this back out to the west. Okay, and now what if we wanted to only know about dealer A, B, and C? And so now we can see that for dealership A, B, and C, their truck sales, we can compare by each region how many sales they've had in each region. So again, this is a very powerful way to create a pivot table. So let's go ahead and delete this. And we'll recreate it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is select the data. And then we'll go up to Data, Pivot Table, Create. And we've already selected the data, so it says current selection. That's good. And now we see all those components again. This was one of the filters that we could have across the top, a filter on the side, the general filter, and then our data. And again, our data needs to be a number. So let's go ahead and recreate that pivot table we had. So I think we had the region as the top column, or the top filter. We had the vehicle on this side over here. We had the dealership as the general filter. And then our sales was the main part of the data that we were analyzing. And we just click OK, and we can see down here that our pivot table was recreated. And that's about it. If you want to edit anything, you can right click inside the data and click Edit Layout. Now one thing that you can also do is have subcategories. So let's say instead of having the dealer as a general filter, you could bring it down here and put it as a subcategory. So now when we look at the filter, take a look over here. Here the dealership is up here. Now it's going to show down here. When we moved that field into this filter location. Okay, so now we have east, north, south, and west, but it's broken further down by the dealerships. So if we now do a filter on the dealer and we only want to see ABC, it will remove the XYZ data and readjust our totals over here and at the bottom. So once again, the pivot table is very useful and powerful for analyzing numbers and also for presenting the information to management so that they can get a better sense of what's going on with whatever you're dealing with, whether it's car sales or anything else. And this is much easier to read than this big data set up here. So that should do it for this section.